We have to start with the plenary session free. So first plenary session for today. And I'd like to invite Christophe Buffet from the Agence Française de Développement, French Development Agency, to join us on the stage. He'll be moderating the plenary session titled Aligning Actions and Monitoring for Climate Adaptation and Resilience with SDGs. You call your participants, or do you want me to call them? Okay, let me just call also the speakers for this panel. We have Neha Sharma, who's a results-based management, knowledge and learning specialist at the Adaptation Fund, who's joining us virtually. We have Aminur Rahman, who's a regional lead economist to come to join us on the stage. We have Gaël Fèvre, who's a research fellow at Griffith University in Australia, also joining us online, I believe. Right. Yeah. Amund Mag, sorry, I'm mispronouncing this family name for sure, head of research at IRM, UIB. Then Felicia Khan, product owner, Parametric Insurance, Tower Limited. And finally, Lepani Uluinaviti, manager projects Insure Resilience Fund of the Reserve Bank of Fiji. Please come to the stage.
Thank you. So please come to the stage, speakers. So as you mentioned, I'm Christophe Buffet. I'm working for AFD in Paris. I'm a research officer about adaptation, loss and damage, and habitability. Please have a seat. Thank you. So we've, Jean-Louis mentioned it just earlier, we've touched already many aspects of SDGs. In yesterday's discussions, this SDG 7 about affordable and clean energy, SDG 12 about responsible consumption and production, SDG 14, life below water, SDG 15, life and land, and many others. And of course, SDG 13 on climate change included adaptation related to resilience. And this morning, we'll continue on this diverse path, gaining new insights into SDGs and resilience with contributions from no fewer than 6 speakers. We'll explore issues related to monitoring and evaluation, as well as how, more generally, data can drive action in various ways. And before giving the floor to our distinguished speakers, I'd like to share with you a result, or more precisely, a non-result of COP29 that may have been overlooked. This is a result or a non-result about the global goal for adaptation. Currently, do you know what is the only metric about adaptation that makes an agreement between all different stakeholders? It's just the dollar. The dollar is the only common metric between the different stakeholders. So we definitely need to go beyond that and to find a framework with relevant indicators that will help us to about adaptation, because there are already a lot of fundings, a lot of projects related to adaptation since many years, but we have finally no real clues about results, the outcomes of projects. So we really need a framework for that. That was actually the goal of the Global Goal for Adaptation, and the framework, the so-called UAE-BELEM framework, and the roadmap for indicators that was decided at COP28. And we expected new insights and demands and precisions from COP29 about that. Unfortunately, the result is quite poor, and the delegates finally chose to rely on a group of experts to design, they asked them to refine, has more than 400 indicators. The irony is that this precise group of experts, nominated for as a body for the UN, this precise group of experts expected COP29 to give them a roadmap, a precise roadmap. So it's a kind of vicious circle. So we'll see how we'll improve that, but definitely it reflects the complex relations. It reflects a lot about COPs, of course, but it reflects also about the complex relations between science and policy, but also about the complexity of adaptation itself, which is quite complicated to circumscribe and to define, to design. And so hence the difficulty to define a relevant framework. And so for that, and to jump on this discussion, we have 6 different speakers that will speak about the metrics and the data more generally about SDGs. So I turn now to Neha Sharma, if she's online. She's not online. Okay. Maybe we can start with another speaker. Okay, no problem. So I will start with Mr. Aminur Rahman. So you are the regional lead economist at the Asian Development. Bangladesh is highly vulnerable. Actually, it was placed on the climate and adaptation map quite early by late Professor Salimul Haq. As early as 1989, he designed a map showing the impact of sea level rise on Bangladesh. And today, Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable country, but also one of the most advanced as regards adaptation. So I think that will be more or less the presentation that you will display. Thank you. Hence a question also about Bangladesh. How can we elaborate a framework to ensure that all those progress are well measured and with a lot of investment from many donors and a lot of framework that has been designed by the government and the communities?
Yeah, that would be good. So I just, okay, thank you so much. Honorable Chair and distinguished guests and the panelists. So I'll try to go through a few slides on a comprehensive program, I would say, that ADB sort of designed, and it is under implementation in Bangladesh, focusing on climate resilient, inclusive development, policy-based lending. So policy-based lending is basically an instrument whereby instead of identifying whether there would be a bridge or road or whatever, the money actually goes to the government budget, and it is really the government who decides on the priorities and undertake those priority interventions to address the whatever the focus of the budget support. So in this case, this is the climate resilient inclusive development is the title of the budget support program. So it was basically focusing both on adaptation issues and mitigation issues as well. So as the chair already mentioned, Bangladesh is actually one of the most vulnerable countries, as you know, to the climate change. A significant number of people are really vulnerable to this climate change issues, as well as a significant part of the country is also vulnerable to climate change related effects. And as you know, Bangladesh is a very small landmass, whereas we have a very, a significant number of people living there. So whenever anything happens, it really affects a huge sum of people in the country. So climate change issue is really a critical issue. And I'm not going to go through all these details, but there are different estimates on the loss and damages by different studies that have been done in Bangladesh. At the same time, there have been also studies done that showed the significant need of financing to address the climate change agenda. So again, the government itself developed its own climate change plans. It started with Delta Plan, which is really a long-term plan, but there have been also nationally determined contribution update to focus on the mitigation agenda, national adaptation plan to focus on the adaptation priorities and so forth and so on. All these plans have been also pointing out the significant need of financing to address the climate change agenda in Bangladesh. And at the same time, as the chair already pointed out, Bangladesh really made the climate change issue is a real issue even before climate change has been an agenda at the global level. So this slide shows that some of the work that has been done in the country, and also how the country emerged in the global platform in terms of advocating the importance of addressing the climate change agenda in the country. So just some examples, it basically emerged as a global leader of the vulnerable 20. Then it also took significant number of steps to improve the resilience aspect to the climate change agenda. So some estimates suggested that, the number of deaths from the climate change events have fallen down significantly over the years. And here are some statistics of different studies that shows the progress made by the country in terms of addressing the climate change agenda. But having said that, when we started to work on this program, nonetheless, there are obviously a number of binding constraints, as we say that, to address the next steps in terms of advancing the climate change agenda. So there are several horizontal or cross-cutting issues in terms of lack of a whole of government institutional framework to overcome the climate change challenges. Some of these ministries and agencies, obviously, I think we heard the word siloed many times, but work in a siloed fashion, resulting in duplicative actions or activities without proper monitoring and evaluation. There is, of course, a huge gap in terms of capacity of different line ministries and agencies to really develop the climate responsive projects and investment-ready projects. And obviously, there is also a huge capacity gap in terms of accessing climate financing from the like the GCF and that kind of facilities to attract the financing from there. There's lack of capacity in that respect as well. And then obviously we break it down also at the sectoral level, where in the agriculture sector, there are several constraints related to the modernization, climate proofing agricultural land, early warning system, and so forth and so on. And that goes also related to natural water resource management, early flood warning system. Although Bangladesh made some progress, but there are still, many steps to be taken. As you all know, or whoever visited Bangladesh and Dhaka in particular know about the traffic jam situation, but the bigger picture is that unplanned urbanization also led to this problem. And whenever there is urban flooding, it really disrupts activities in the urban sector as well. Then in the transport and energy, that's more on mitigation. So I'll quickly, skip those because the focus is more on the adaptation side, at least in this forum. So now the question is how to really address these challenges and what sort of value addition that brings that is brought forward from the ADB side. So we basically worked with the government in terms of identifying the structural reform issues that they should work on in order to address the climate change agenda. So it is kind of a three-pillar approach where we have the first pillar is really about creating an enabling environment and institutional mechanism to address the climate change agenda in a holistic fashion. So it means sort of an interministerial coordination setup, really to be monitored by this program was designed last year. So at that point, it was the Prime Minister's office really overseeing that. But now, as we know, after political transition, climate change still is a key priority of the current government. So this sort of institutional setup, monitoring from the higher level of the government about interministerial progress, etc. And then we have also reforms related to adaptation aspects, so that the policy reforms, institutional reforms, as well as investment that government should take in terms of addressing the adaptation priorities. And here are these many such priorities include the climate proofing agricultural land, access to better technology, information system to the farmers, then addressing the urban flooding issue with better planning and design and monitoring. And then the third pillar is on the mitigation pillar, which also has some link with the adaptation. And here the focus is that it's not an easy solution, but how to really move forward from a single road transport system to a multimodal transportation system, so that all these issues related to congestions and the consequent effects could be minimized, as well as how to really transit from the sort of energy transition also in the transport sector, how to introduce that in terms of moving towards electric vehicle system, buses and transportation system, metro rail and so forth and so on. And last thing is on the outcome. So obviously we also try to identify, going back to the point on monitoring
the cyclone wind speed and the rainfall levels. And we've been fortunate in the last 4 years that we have not yet any cyclone. And it's not that we are wishing for a cyclone to happen so that we can test the product, but that's the only way that we can actually test how the product actually works. But based on the tests that we've conducted so far with the pilot, with the rainfall product, in terms of the claims out, the claim payment process, that's a seamless process that's taking place. For about 1 to 2 weeks, the money is already going into the accounts of the beneficiaries. So that's something that the Reserve Bank sees, and it's aligned to its national financial inclusion strategies 2022 to 2030. So 2024 is more or less, we're coming to the end of the short-term period of our national financial inclusion strategy. One of the priority pillar that reflects our commitment to this in terms of what today's program is about, in terms of alignment with SDG 13. So we believe that this product and the features and what it offers to the market and to our vulnerable population actually is aligned specifically to SDG 13. And one of the strategic action that we have under priority pillar 1 on inclusive finance is that it develop affordable and appropriate financial product and services, including those to mitigate shocks and build resilience to the adverse impact of climate change. So that's where we went further from just being a partner in terms of just being a regulator and approving the product, trialing it in the sandbox. We have now transitioned into leading the implementation itself. So with the assistance of UNCDF, the PK program here in Fiji, we developed a project proposal that went to the Institute Resilience Fund. So annually they put out a call for proposal. And we did that in 2023 with the assistance of UNCDF. And we got our approval late December 2023, and we signed the agreement in August 2021 because of the onerous requirements that are there to comply with ISF requirements. But basically, we've started the program from August 2021. It will run to July 2026. And we are targeting an additional from the baseline that we had of about 2,461 policyholders or households. We are now targeting an additional 5,000 households to be covered under this project. So another 5,000 households that we are considered to be part of the vulnerable population, you know, in the vulnerable community in Fiji. And we are starting the work on that already with Tower, our project partners are Tower Insurance and Sun Insurance. And we are also, so the RBF is the representative of the demand side, and we are working with aggregators in terms of PDF-led, the pilot. So we are working with them again because one of the lessons learned that from the pilot phase is that, you know, it's important that we work with the aggregators because they are linked directly to the members of the target group that we are looking for. So that's more or less in terms of our partnership with Insur Resilience. It's a $4.5 million project, and 2.3 million will be co-funded by ISF. And the rest will be provided in kind and some small financial contribution by the project partners. So 5,000 policyholders, implying about 25,000 beneficiaries in terms of an average of five members per household. And we are looking at about carrying out around 104 community and outreach events and targeting 10,000 people to cover within these 2 years. And there's a lot of focus on women because of that 5,000 that we're targeting, 50% has to be women, but our governor has asked us that from that 5,000, our target internally will be more than 5,000, and it has to be more than 50% women to be represented. So that's more or less what our partnership with Insur Resilience is, and we're glad that we're working with the supply side partners in terms of Tower and Sun Insurance. And based on where we're at now on the 4th month of the project, it's looking likely that we're going to exceed our target even for the first year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would have also many questions as a social scientist about the parametric insurances. We can keep that, and with the questions from the floor at the end. We have the chance to have now Nia Sharma online and the other speakers who are online. And we spoke earlier about how we can measure adaptation. So Nia, you are result-based management, knowledge and learning at the Adaptation Fund. How do you proceed with this measurement, and how is adaptation aligned with SDGs within Adaptation Fund portfolio?
Thank you so much for that question. I just want to check if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Yes. And I had a few slides. I'm unsure if they're up there or can be pulled up. I'd uploaded slides into the portal. Great. I see something happening on the screen there. I don't see the slides. Are they up?
It's coming.
Great. Well, as those are being pulled up, maybe I'll just start introducing a little bit the Adaptation Fund, and through the slides, I'll also answer the questions that you've asked. So thank you for welcoming me there. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I would have been very excited to meet all the wonderful colleagues there and have these conversations real time as part of the panel, but also in the breaks and the lunches and the after conference activities. But I'll just briefly introduce the Adaptation Fund to you. The Adaptation Fund was established in 2001 and operationalized under the Kyoto Protocol starting 2007. And since 2019, it's been serving the Paris Agreement. The fund has over 1.2 billion that's been allocated across over 180 different adaptation projects. And the thing that's very unique about the fund is that it's a direct access mechanism. So it has 56 national implementing entities that can directly access the funds. You don't have to go through multilaterals. Next slide, please. I'm unsure if I can control the slides. I'll just be asking the organizers to change them for me. So if you don't mind going to the next slide. Great, thank you. So as I was saying, I was just starting to introduce the fund to you. And essentially, the model that the fund has applied is that it's country-driven. And there's a huge focus on direct access and locally led adaptation. Next slide, please. And just building a little bit and sharing a little bit more about the Adaptation Fund, we are currently in the second multi-year strategic plan of the Adaptation Fund, and this plan has 3 pillars or focus areas. Of course, action, but also there's a huge focus on innovation with a separate innovation funding window, and on learning and sharing. And you can see a graphic there that's summarizing the strategy of the fund. But again, the key things here remain that it's country-driven and there's a focus on those that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse impacts of climate change. Next slide, please. These are some of the sort of foundational elements of the fund. I already mentioned the fact that it's focused on the most vulnerable communities, but there's also no prescribed sectors or approaches, and that's what the country-driven model implies. It implies that the countries really get to set their priorities and then approach the fund to fund those priorities. The country allocation is up to 20 million per country, and up to 2 implementing entities that can be accredited through the focal points located in each of the countries. And what also separates this fund from others is that there's no co-financing requirement, which means that you can bring projects where the full cost can be funded through the Adaptation Fund. And more than 50% of our portfolio is direct access. Next slide, please. I've just joined the fund. This is week 3 on the job, and I'll be leading results-based management, knowledge and learning. I'm coming from the climate investment funds where I was for 7 years leading their evaluation function. So I'm very interested in results and impact and how to maximize that through the operations of climate funds. So in the Adaptation Fund, the strategic results framework has these 3 sort of levels. There's the level of the fund where we have to report back into the global stocktake exercise and into the global goal for adaptation. So this highest fund level strategic results framework intention. But then there's also the Adaptation Fund's own strategic priorities, and then the project level outcomes and objectives. And in this structure, because of this country-driven model, that lowest level outcomes and outputs are really determined by the country themselves, and they can be customized and we have quite a flexible approach to determining this level of outcomes. If you go to the next slide, please. The next slide is going to share the fund level strategic results framework outcomes. And the intention is that any project that is sent to us should respond to at least one of these outcomes. And you can see outcome 4, which is about increased adaptive capacity within countries and includes infrastructure assets. That's the one that we have the highest level of projects responding to. But each project has to respond to only one of these outcomes. It can be multiple to be eligible for funding through the Adaptation Fund. Next slide, please. In addition to a lot of the concrete projects, which means projects that can have actual results and impact on the ground, there's also an emphasis on capacity development. And there's a readiness program of the fund that's helping to strengthen the capacity of existing and potential national and regional implementing entities to prepare them to receive the funds and to prepare them to maximize the impact from the funds that they receive. So there's a lot of capacity building that's going on to support accredited implementing entities through seminars, exchanges, and also a community of practice that has been established for these implementing entities. But in addition to that, there's also support to countries that are seeking accreditation through grants, through seminars, through events, and through direct support through the technical staff based here at the Adaptation Fund. And there's a huge emphasis on knowledge management. You might recall the 3 pillars of the strategy that I'd shown for the Adaptation Fund. Learning and knowledge was one of those 3 pillars. Next slide, please. So as part of the Global Goal for Adaptation, there are several targets that have been set up, and our portfolio responds to each of these. We're currently doing analysis on the funding amount and the number of projects, but this slide is essentially showing that we're responding to each of those areas set in the GGA. Next slide, please. And in terms of SDGs, just given our focus on resilience and climate action, there's a lot of contribution to these. Again, we might do some further analysis to quantify this contribution, but in terms of just responding to the sectors ranging from agriculture, resilience, marine ecosystems, and innovation, including promoting gender equality, the portfolio responds to a wide diversity of SDGs, which is not a surprise given how cross-cutting climate tends to be as a sector and its relation to the different SDGs. There's, of course, specific targets that are set in the SDGs that the portfolio is responding to. Approximately 59% of the adaptation fund projects include components that are directly responding to resilience and capacity building. Next slide, please. But essentially, just to show that there's a huge emphasis on responding to both development and climate goals. And then specifically on your question on challenges associated with monitoring climate resilience efforts, we've done some work with our implementing entities to understand the challenges that they are facing in creating results frameworks and reporting to us. But I'll speak a little bit more broadly about these challenges because I have also experience from another fund which faced similar challenges. And of course, the biggest one seems to be is generally the availability of data and the quality of the data and the diversity of the quality from different entities, depending on the resources and capacity they might have, and their accessibility to the data that they might need to make decisions. So in a lot of instances, we don't have baseline data that may have been collected at the start of the project, which makes it difficult to track progress. But there also might be the absence of frameworks that are allowing us to aggregate results across projects. So sometimes it's difficult to report back at the portfolio level, given that the way people are measuring different aspects could be significantly different. There are specific instances where, for example, if we want to assess change in livelihoods, for example, like what counts as livelihoods, what is the baseline, how do you track it? It's very difficult to do. We also see in terms of gender tracking, it's sometimes, if you really want to get into empowerment indicators, for example, for gender, and not just number of women that attended specific events, again, how do you assess that? How do you measure that? How do you do that in a standardized or consistent way? The other question associated with data quality is, do you want to standardize? Because you want to give a lot of flexibility to the implementing entities of these projects to be able to determine their own indicators. And again, that makes aggregation across the different projects quite difficult. So there's sometimes a trade-off between the flexibility that you want to provide and that is needed and being able to report at the aggregate level. There are constraints in terms of budget limitations from the adaptation fund side. Each project has a monitoring, evaluation, learning budget, a MEL budget. But even despite that budget, there may not be a lot of capacity built in the country or directly associated with the project. The training can be can require some time, and then you also have individuals sometimes leave the project, and then that capacity is lost. Probably being used elsewhere, but it's used directly in relation to the project. And then there could be language barriers. There could be general, sometimes lack of support from the leadership to dedicate sufficient time to these functions. But there could be constraints that are economic or financial. The third constraint I wanted to highlight is engagement with the local communities. There's a huge emphasis in the climate funds to engage and to use more participatory approaches to monitoring, evaluation, and learning, which means it could take more time, but there's participation of those who are being impacted by these projects in assessing its progress. And I think that's really key, and that's a principle that we live by. It's in our evaluation policy as well. However, it can be quite difficult to engage with the communities given the amount of resources it takes and the timelines for the data collection. And then sometimes it's just not prioritized by the implementers of the projects to really engage at the most local level. I think I just have one more slide, or maybe two more. These are just examples because I wanted to share examples where we've had projects with a lot of good results. But there have been challenges in the sense that the monitoring and evaluation of these projects requires quite strong coordination between the implementing entities and then the sub-executing entities, and the continuous capacity that needs to be built can be a challenge. So here's a program in Costa Rica. It's about reducing vulnerability in critical areas so that we can reduce the negative impacts of climate change. And there are more than 40 executing entities for this project. So the capacity that has to be built in each of these entities and the coordination that's required with the parent entity or the implementing entity can be quite hectic and require quite a bit of resources. But we can see that the project is having good results, and we're hoping to do a better job of this local bottom-up and local-led M&E in the future in this project. Next slide, please. And I think that's definitely my last. This is another example of a project in the Cook Islands, and it's leading to a lot of good results. For example, different four climate early warning systems have been installed. But a big challenge that we face sometimes with these early warning systems is the operation and maintenance, particularly as the project is nearing the end or has ended. The sustainability of these systems can be quite difficult, and you want to train the local people and you want them to equip them to collect the data, but to sustain those impacts can pose a challenge. So I wanted to share that as an example here. I think that's it. I'll stop sharing my slides, and hopefully I wasn't speaking too fast and you could hear all of that, but very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a good news. If you all agree, we will have more time to have a discussion with the room and answer any questions at the end. Let's now take a detour to Norway with Amon Maj. I hope I pronounce your name well, to explore SDG 14, namely life below water. As we all know, climate change is already impacting marine life through ocean acidification, through ocean warming, rising sea levels, ocean currents, and the increasing frequency of extreme events and so on. And these changes disrupt biodiversity, ecosystem stability, and ultimately food security. Hence the question to you, Amon, what are the relevant data needed to monitor and evaluate the quantity and the quality of seafood, and how can we ensure that the resources remain sustainable to contribute to food security?
Thank you, Christopher. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So this, and thank you so much for inviting me to talk on this meeting. And I should really have been in Fiji at the moment because of the ongoing cooperation between USP and University of Bergen. But the destiny didn't bring me there, so I'm here in Bergen instead. So, and this talk I guess will be a bit in the outskirt of what you are discussing, but I think hopefully it will be a bit fun to take this concepts also in. I was told rather to share my screen, so I'll try to do that. Can you see my screen?
I think it's coming. Yes, we can see it.
All right. So yeah, I'm both working at the University of Bergen and at the Institute of Marine Research in Bergen. So just to start out with some of the points. Okay. So now it's not moving. Hopefully I can get it to move. Yeah, okay, I'll bring you something from what we are getting out of the sea, and our worry is, of course, what's happening to the sea with climate change. And we have, in fact, for our sake, we have been doing utilizing the same resources for more than 1,000 years. As the cod came into shore to spawn and we were catching it, we could just hang it up and dry it because of the cold weather and export it. Very good economy for our country, and also gave the trade, which is very important also for the Southeast Asian countries. So this is where we traded fish. In fact, this is from the 1950s. I'm exactly now sitting in the building in the mid there, which now is a research facility, which previously was fish trade. So we are utilizing the large productive sea areas in Northeast Atlantic, and Norway have a quite large economic zone, in fact comparable in size to Fiji, which we have been utilizing quite well. In addition to the zone, as you know, on the world and also in our country, the aquaculture is rising very fast. And if you look at this curve, which is from the SOFIA report of FAO, most people would think that aquaculture is increasing, but we should also be aware that half of the animal protein from our seas is in fact still wild catch. And that's really different from food from the land area. It's quite fantastic, and it needs really to be taken care of. It's the wild catch and those fish types we still can harvest so much of. So this is in fact a kind of fantastic resource which could go into eternity if we are managing it well. From outside now, we have about 2.3, 2.5 million tons of wild catch and 1.7 million tons of farmed fish, mostly salmon. So what I'm going into now is what do we have to do to take care of it? And what we have been having to do is to take care of it through monitoring, because that prevails the value and the quality for both economy and human health. So when the 60s started and we got Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and everyone was turning into what is the pollution doing, we started with a large monitoring program. First, quite little, but after a while, we had to do much more. Each species had to be controlled in quite large monitoring programs. That means that we had to sample quite a lot of fish all over the fishing area in the Northeast Atlantic. And then this is an example for the cod. And then developing this, we do the baseline study, we follow them up. We did indicator species for the ocean management plans, hotspot studies where there were more pollution, and also a large program for the farmed fish. That was to be able to sell and to be able to have a healthy diet. And we had to then analyze for all the contaminants which you are concerned of when it comes to seafood, especially then the heavy metals, dioxins, PFAS is just coming up. So this is the large program we had to do. But enabled to assure and to be studying these resources, we also saw to which of the important nutrients do our seafood come up with. And that is, as you know, especially the omega-3, the vitamin D, and iodine, very important, which a very large population worldwide is lacking. So what we did then was to put all these data into a large database, which through the last 20 years have in a kind of a big value, and it's there for consumers, for the industry, And we are exporting, our FAO is using the data, the EFSA is using the data. So as a large exporter of fish, we really want to expand this way of thinking also, that this is an important part of taking care of the resource. And of course, this kind of large database can be used for science and good publishing, including then, since we have time series, we can publish and look into what is really happening. Does the mercury level increase as the climate change happens, or is it stable? So this kind of studies are possible because of the kind of a bit boring, but very thorough monitoring systems. So what we would like to do now, and it should say sustainability indicators here, that these, in addition to all the measured data, we should look into how can we monitor good indicators of sustainability, both for the wild catch, for the fish farming, also the areas we are harvesting, and here the marine protected areas comes in, and also how do we utilize the fish, including what kind of waste does different fish species come up with? How can we use them mostly efficient for nutrition? So this is what we are really working on, and this covers quite a lot of the SDGs. Our data has just recently been used, and in fact, the new risk and benefit evaluation of seafood was quite a lot based on the large report to the left, which was really commissioned by our group here in Bergen. So based on this, based on this, there is several of the SDGs we are trying to cover, and which are of course worrying us. And based on what we are doing here, I've just wanted to mention then the cooperation program we are running with USP through the University of Bergen, which is called the Norway Pacific Ocean Climate Scholarship Program. We are having 18 PhD running at the moment, taken up for a joint program between our university in Bergen and the University of South Pacific. And I really would do a kind of cliffhanger for tomorrow's parallel session, where I think most of the PhD students in this program will present in the program, which is called Bridge to Building Climate Resilience for Our Pacific Communities. So this is also, that's why I should have been really with you now and working with the PhD students. So of other concrete projects coming out of what we are doing, I just want to mention this, the Global Action Network, which was put up by our owner, the Ministry of Fisheries in Norway, which tries to increase the interest of marine food and marine food systems because of their very high importance, and it's in fact growing as an important as a protein source. And this was in alignment with the UN Decade Action of Nutrition, which is now being bridged towards the new decade of action for ocean science. And this includes, in fact, all the parts of the aquatic food system chain, from the harvest, farming, and all the trade and the processing, the market and the consumers. So there is an extremely important chain here to take care of. And what we are also working then is to bridge the two decades, the decade of nutrition and the decade of ocean science, which we think will be very successful in taking care of the marine-based food system. Yeah, I was just going to mention this report, which both the university and the IMR are members and working with the European Marine Board. And as you know, they have been looking into the coastal resilience, and the coast is really the hot spot of problems at the moment, because that is where the interface between too high human activities and nature is highest. So the resilience of the coast is so very important, both for taking care of all kind of the marine resources, and for me as a nutritionist also of course the marine food is the most important. Yeah, so just to come to a kind of conclusion, the food safety and food security are linked. If you don't have food safety, you don't have really food security, and that's on all levels, both for subsistent fishers and recreational fisheries, and also for the commercial fisheries, small scale, large scale. And yeah, so what we have done is to build a health government-driven monitoring system. And that is the monitoring part, especially on the contaminants, but also with the nutrients. And if it should be useful, you have to be really assuring the population that you are doing it right. So you have to have a certain size. And to get this and to cooperate with fishermen and those working in the food chain, you really need more ocean and food literacy, which is very, very important. And I think our joint program between University of Bergen and the USB is an example of this competence building, which we are trying to achieve. So that was my last slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amund.
A bit different than the other speakers, but thank you for letting me have this presentation. Yeah.
Thank you. I promised at the very beginning of the session that there would be a very diverse presentation. So thank you to help me to keep this promise, all the more so since with a very interesting presentation in a world that I personally don't know. So you incite us to have a closer look at this as regards adaptation. Last but not least, let me turn back on the Pacific with Gaël Fèvre, who is research fellow at Griffith University. Gaël, data can challenges remain for that. For example, when should the alerts be triggered? By who, according to which data, based on what information, through which communication channels, especially to reach the most vulnerable, what we call the last mile or the last kilometer. So Gaël, please enlighten us on that.
Hi everyone, thanks for inviting me to this session. I wish I could be with you today, next time. And yeah, so I'm gonna present a project we did in the Pacific and try to answer your questions through it. So are we using the presentation I put on the portal? Is it possible? Yeah, so this presentation was about, so it's about strengthening coastal risk assessment in small island developing states. And it was done through a big project. So can you, next slide, please? So this project was about, it was an eco-based adaptation project. And it aimed to identify appropriate adaptation intervention in the coastal zone of the Pacific island states and territories. In the face of rapidly changing climate and ongoing capital-intensive development. So it was like a multidisciplinary project. So we had a C key team. So it was about ecosystem-based approach, climate risk, socioeconomics and tourism, and coastal processes, and having as well integrated assessment of adaptation option. And then we get the part about recommendation. So if you want to know more about this project, feel free to go on the website. We try to now extend it as well, because we found very good output from it. So next slide, please. So yeah, so to give a bit of context, so this project was done for the South Small Island Developing States in the Pacific, and we were focused on Melanesia. And so in the Pacific, you get Micronesia, Polynesia, and Melanesia. And it would be very good as well at the end to have like regional collaboration between all of them. Can you just press a button just to get the next image? Yeah, and then as well. Yeah, sorry, and press one more time. So yeah, we were focused on Vanuatu, especially in Efate Island with Port Vila, which is the capital, and Tana Island, which is quite remote. Next slide, please. So yeah, so for the coastal risk assessment, usually coastal risk by definition, it's a product of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, and it is essential to address this factor to develop a robust strategy for coastal risk management. According to IPCC, so risk can be defined as a potential for consequence where something of human value, including humans themselves, is at stake and where the outcome is uncertain. So that was the motivation. So to try to adopt to address this. So why we picked Vanuatu as well. Next slide. So Vanuatu is, according to the World Risk Index, is one of the highest risk, exposed to a high risk in the world, because it's situated within the heart of the Pacific, of the Ring of Fire. And so this can trigger, so you can have earthquake, and this can trigger as well tsunami wave. And they're also exposed to many other hazards, like cyclones, for example, and that can produce like heavy rainfall and strong winds and destructive storm surge and flooding. And this can damage infrastructure and then the economy as well. Next slide, please. So as most people have probably heard about the devastated cyclone Pam, but they have as well other cyclones very category 5 in during COVID time as well, which was a very big challenge too. And we know that around in the world, 26 million people from developing countries are affected by natural disaster. And this number is predicted to grow due to increasing population, urbanization, and infrastructure. So climate change is accelerating, and with further, it can aggravate this issue for developing countries, and including the effect of poverty, urbanization. So it's very important to address all this risk. And next slide. So yeah, we need to enriching knowledge on climate risk and resilience. And if you can click on next slide. Yeah, so another aspect of risk, coastal risk, is about water quality. So in 2016, a lot of fish die in Pango, so that's a little coral reef lagoon in Efate. Suddenly, so we were expecting, it's probably due to it was very warm water. It was in February when it's very warm water at this time. And this happened a second time in 2021, but the reason remains unknown because there is no monitoring. And that's why for us, it's very important to monitor and install over there constant monitoring. And so we started to do it when we start the project, and we try to keep doing and install more monitor. But this need to be in other area, other Pacific islands. So that's very important to understand events and then to address future as well. So next slide, please. So for coastal communities, so there is a lot of coastal risk we identify, and that could increase with climate change. So like a storm surge, because it's life threatening and it can produce severe erosion, flooding, also extreme wave, sea level rise, wastewater discharge. And of course, with climate change, like wave can change direction or increase in size. So this really need to be very well understood. Yeah, so also this island often has like are surrounded by a reef, and this reef acts like a natural protection for the coastal community, and it's also a source of food, and it attracts tourists. So it's you all heard about the reef bleaching, coral bleaching, and this is we really need to protect. So try for us like nature-based solution is very important, and we really want to put effort on restoration reef to make sure like they keep having this natural protection and food as well. But there is very low study in terms of like impact of like coastal risk assessment when it's coral reef, because processes are a bit different than sand. So there is a lot of research to do in this area. Next slide, please. So to identify risk, we have to look at coastal risk. We have to look at what can affect the shoreline. So we were talking about wave energy, the water level, local currents, winds, and also what could affect like water quality for the food security. And so we really need to look at circulation in lagoon, tide, pollutants, meteorological condition, and also how this change in a long-term period, and with also like in decadal cycle. Next change. So what we identify, there's a lot of challenge for remote island, because often there is not many data available. And often like the global data will be too coarse, because if it's a very tiny area with global data, you can sometimes not everything is represented. And it could be as well difficult to collect data. We went Vanuatu, we installed a wave buoy, we tried to, but often there is nothing if you want to look at a particular pollutant, and it's not, it's very hard or bring back to our country to do the analysis. And often also we find like adaptation is done without any full understanding of local processes, and it's very specific to an area, and that's why it's very important to don't do maladaptation, because you might want to fix, for example, use of seawall, and you're gonna to fix maybe the issue at this area, but maybe you will cause like another issue in the next beach. So it's very interesting to know the local coastal processes and make sure we understand it's not adapted based on another case study, and data has been collected. Next slide, please. So that's an example of global data, why sometimes it's not always applicable, and you really need to collect local data, and we really need to train local people to try to collect data and make them understanding how important it is to address like all this coastal issue. So for example, this is a port resolution bay in Tana, and when you use global data to look at the topography or bathymetry, so bathymetry would be like the floor elevation, but for the sea, and topography, we talk about the land. And if you look at this square, it's like the point of data from the global data. So basically, you don't see any bay anymore. So you can't really, if you want to look at the local processes, if you don't have collected like this area with like ecosonder, like it will be or it would create a LiDAR. You can't really do it. Next slide, please. So we did some water quality experiment, and we created a big data collection monitoring. So this was for the water quality, to understand the circulation of this lagoon, and understand as well how, if for example there is pollutant or warmer sea, how the pollutant can circulate, and how long it will stay in the lagoon. So look at the residential time. And because they have issue of sanitation and E. coli. So if you want to know more, you can read this paper. And the next slide, please. And this one was about, so in Tana, so in port resolution, they were very concerned about a school who is on a cliff, and they saw like it was this cliff is eroding regularly, but so they were blaming the waves. And so when we look very in detail on a specific area, so they were thinking maybe we can have, I don't know, a reef offshore to break the wave and protect. But at the end, when you do like there is a local study, we realized it was not that, it was not stable, and it was better to use a nature-based solution, for example, to stabilize the cliff, because when you have, for example, a big cyclones event, you get storm surge and you have elevation of water, and this current can erode a bit the cliff. And so we were looking at with simple like theory as well how the shoreline can retreat, and how as well it's the best way to adapt, to do adaptation and avoid like spending millions and then it will not sort out the problem, and just try to adapt. So we work with the local community, and this was very interesting because the local community knows more than all of us because they've been there for generation and generation, but also we need the specific coastal knowledge. So you can learn more about this study in this paper. Next slide, please. Yeah, so our insight is we really need to have like long-term program of monitoring, and that's one big issue because you get a lot of research projects coming and living, and then there's no data. So we really want in the next step to try find funding to do like maybe a centralized database where the local government can keep, but then every data from every project coming like will be stored, and then you can learn much more about the future if you get all the past events and all the data collected and keep monitoring. Also, we need really consistency between data collection. So if you collect like bathymetry or topography, you need to be consistent and relative to the same reference and same data reference, like because often we can find discontinuity and then it's very hard to compare data. And we found like it was very, it's always good to work with local community. They have the knowledge and we need to share our knowledge. So it's really need to be a work together and do a lot of training because they need to have all the skills to do it. And so yeah, so we need as well to have like local coastal processes knowledge to do all coastal risk, and sometimes fine numerical model is very essential to do some scenario, but to do numerical model we need a lot of data. And the last point also is to sometimes look at nature-based solution also and work with the nature to protect the coastline. It's very essential. We find a lot of places where they remove mangrove to install like a very big resort, but then the protection for the coastline is removed, and then they have issue of erosion or they will have flooding. And so it's very important to try to keep and preserve and protection their coast before to create more issue added to the climate. And the last slide, please. So I just wanted to quickly show about early warning system, which is also, I think, a good thing to install, especially like in these small island developing states. So we've done that. We're doing that now for Australia, and we would really love to do that, find funding to do that for Pacific community. It's about cyclones and try to, so there's often very no time to evacuate because the cyclones, its forecast are very uncertain, and it would be always like 24 hours before when we have much more information to know like where the cyclone is likely to make landfall. And unfortunately, sometimes it's too late to evacuate a population and to take measures. So this early warning system, you can pick different cyclones parameter, and you can with this we can then display inundation map of storm tide and pick different time of the tide, because often one of the main issue with cyclones is we don't know if it's going to make landfall during high tide or low tide, and this change a lot in terms of storm tide and then damage. So we think this could be installed as well in the Pacific, and that could help as well to improve risk. And yeah, next slide. And thank you for all your attention, and I'm happy to answer your question.
Thank you, Gaëlle.
It's a bit different as well from other presentation.
It was quite rich. Now I'm sure that some of you are eager to ask questions. Others are quite eager to take a break and a coffee. So maybe we can cut it in two and take 10 minutes for questions. Yes, please, there is a question over there.
Thank you. I'm Louise Marie. I'm a PhD student at University of South Pacific in Samoa, and my question is directly to Mr. Amina. Thank you for that presentation this morning. It is well understood that many countries lack integrated policies that address climate resilience across multiple sectors. And even if those policies existed, the implementation and enforcement is often a challenge. And it is so good to hear from Bangladesh, like taking the initiative through your government to strengthen better coordination across these multiple sectors. And because I see that this is a challenge in our countries, because there will always be silos and territory across the sectors. And just wanted to ask if you can just share your experiences. How did you go about it in working across the sectors in terms of better coordination? Thank you.
Maybe respond.
Okay. Thank you. So that's a very important question. So as you rightly point, so first and foremost, I think, well, this is my own observation, not any organizations that I represent. I think until very recently, one of the main weaknesses to address the climate change agenda was that, at least from the government side, that it was, or it has been sort of led by certain line ministries, such as, let's say, Ministry of Environment, or if it roads and transport, then that concern line ministry and so forth and so on, as opposed to really mainstream the climate change agenda into the ministries like, let's say, Ministry of Finance, Planning Commission, and so forth and so on. So one, in order to overcome that challenge, we try to do in the case of Bangladesh, and again, it's lessons we're still learning. It's not that we already know the results, but the two things we try to do. One is that country climate development partnership that I already spoke about in the presentation, that it's an avenue to bring all the concerned line ministries along with their concerned development partners or funding sources and the private sector participants and civil society organizations. And that is being led from the higher level of the government, so that this sort of integration, there is some enforcement mechanism of cross-fertilization of discussions of projects, programs, and how each one complement complement the other, right? So that is kind of the platform. That is one aspect. The other thing that we try to do is through this program is really, even though Bangladesh already developed the climate fiscal framework, we try to further enhance and update that climate fiscal framework in order to align that with the National Adaptation Plan and nationally determined contribution, so that this fiscal framework, that is the, the main way to think about revenue mobilization and then spending, that kind of bring the climate focus in the fiscal framework. So that is the second thing. And then the third enforcement mechanisms that we try to push for is really to mainstream the climate change agenda in the government planning, central planning and resource allocation mechanisms. Because, each year the government has this ADP, annual development plan, but this process not necessarily has been driven with the climate change focus in mind. So on the one hand, you see these high-level strategies like NDC, NAP, etc., that identified the huge financing gap. But on the other hand, the ADP projects doesn't necessarily address to that climate priorities that are identified in the plan. So in the National Adaptation Plan and NDC. So what we try to do is by mainstreaming this climate change consideration in the planning process and ADP allocation, that was another way that you have a central pool of all the projects, and then there is a screening mechanism to see that to what extent these are aligned with the priorities identified in the NDC and NAP items. But anyway, it's a long road. We will see how it goes forward and what sort of feedback we get and how to further improve on that. Thank you.
Thank you. There was another question upstairs. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, I'll stand. My name is Salote Nasalo, and I'm a student here at the University of South Pacific. So welcome to my home. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the well-presented, articulated presentations and very heavy information presentation by all the speakers and panelists this morning. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the NPOC representative. Thank you so much, sir, for choosing to invest in our students, indigenous students from the Pacific region. I'm sure your investment bill has not gone to waste. Secondly, my question is directed to Ms. Neha Sharma in regard to the adaptation funding. I've been approached several times by community representatives on how they can apply for the adaptation funding. And it looks like we are applying for a rocket space scientist position for NASA. And this is the reality that the communities here in the Pacific region are facing. I'm not really aware or sure about the Caribbean, so I'm just going to speak of my fellow family here from the Pacific. It's really difficult because these are very vulnerable communities that need 100% support of the adaptation funding. And yesterday, regarding Master Simi's presentation, you hear firsthand on the approach and the need to decolonize research and methodologies on approaches in conducting research in the Pacific. So is there some way that you can, adjust your requirements so it doesn't look like it's hard for us to apply for the adaptation funding, and even common people like me, mere peasant, can apply for this adaptation funding. There's a certain language that we need to use, adaptation, carbon sequestration. Eh? I will go to the communities and my elders will slap me. What is that, invisible gas? This is the realities that we are facing in the communities. And I would really like to request if you could be more community friendly. When I speak about community, I'm speaking about grassroots, not at national level, regional level, international level. I'm speaking about grassroots, Mapinga, Matua, people that can actually access this funding, and please make it user-friendly. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Since we have only 2 minutes left, I guess the floor is yours, Neha, to answer this question.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you very much for that really excellent question and the passionate way in which you expressed it. So I have a lot of empathy for access to funds, a lot of it, because I've been working with climate funds for the last 10 years. And I do a lot of work across the funds as well, trying to support the GCF, the Adaptation Fund, the CIF, and the Global Environment Facility. And I come from the evaluation world. So I'm often the person pushing the funds and raising awareness about the issues that you've highlighted. The access to funds is very, very difficult, very, very tricky. The number of funds keeps growing in the global climate finance architecture. However, I do want to share a few efforts that the funds are making to address the challenges that you're saying. There's a community, the funds are getting together, and a lot of professionals are working now together to make this access easier, including the accreditation process, which means the process to access these funds, and the reporting process, which is the means in which we're tracking the results of these funds. We're trying to come up with a common results framework and common processes. This work is ongoing, and it's with the intention of achieving the objectives that you've highlighted. Within the Adaptation Fund, there is a locally led adaptation window, which is about creating aggregated agencies within countries to which these local level players can then apply and access the funding. The challenge is the administration of these funds and the way that they're set up with quite heavy governance systems. And apologies to anybody in the audience who are part of the governance systems. I think you're doing a great job, and there are reasons why it was set up in this way, but it's become very complicated. So all of this to say, I empathize with what the issues that you're bringing up. There are efforts now happening globally within the funds to try and make it easier to access these funds. And I really hope that we'll be able to, you and I together, along with all of our colleagues, make this easier for the people who are impacted by climate change the most. I just want to empathize and give you my word that we're trying, and that you and I are part of that effort.
Thank you, Neha. Thank you, all panelists, for this very rich presentations. I'm eager to see the summary of it tomorrow by GDN. Now time is up, and I think it's high time to take a break. Thank you very much.